Okay, we're holding at 89B2. 89B2. Again, the right-hand column, the last paragraph that starts with Rav Papa v'Rav Huna. Okay? So we had just finished up on yesterday Gemara regarding people eating in a group and one person eating a little more gluttonous than other people, and whether you're allowed to kick them out of your group, meaning give them their portion, and then they'll tell them, go eat on the outside, and what's the proper behavior. So here we are again, 89B2, right-hand column, and we begin. Rav Papa Rav Huna bereid Rav Yeshua rivu rifza behade adodi. So Rav Papa Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, were joined together to eat bread. Okay, they're having a meal together. Ado ochel Rav Huna bereid Rav Yeshua chado. When the time that Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, ate one portion of bread, ochel Rav Papa arba. Rav Papa ate 4, so it's 4-1. Amalei, so Rav Huna said to him, Palgali, I think we need to divide things equally. Otherwise, I'm not going to get my fair share of this meal. Amalei, Rav Papa said to him, Kablitrum, excuse me, you accepted me as your partner, unconditionally. So we're going to eat out of the communal plate, and if I eat more than you, tough nuggies. Okay? So then, Rav Huna came along. Asivige kolhani tiyufta. Rav Huna posed to him all the objections that we went through yesterday on the Amid. Right? He cited all the sources. Vishani Adushinan. And Rav Papa answered him back exactly the same way that we got the answers went back and forth yesterday. Then Esvei. Then Rav Huna challenged him from another source. B'nei Chabura. A great, what do you call it? There was one of the members of the group was eating like a glutton, was eating too much, that says that they can dismiss him. Amalei, so Rav Papa said to Rav Huna, Hosam in that case, because they can argue over there. The only reason why we allowed you in is in order to rectify the carbon, that in other words, to make sure that the carbon, the sacrifice gets all eaten up. So we needed enough people to make sure that it got eaten up. So, that's the only reason why you were brought in. You were brought in for the sake of eating up the carbon, not so that you could eat whatever you want. But you and I are not eating a sacrifice. We're having a regular meal. A regular meal, we all agreed to join together. Tough nuggies, that I got a bigger stomach than you do. We're on 89B3. 89B3. Esvei, then Rav Huna asked him again. It says like this, see, boyless, if every once in a blue moon the group goes together to a restaurant in middle of the week, in middle of the year, we said if one of them eats too much, you're allowed to dismiss him. It's Palgalei, right? So then Rav Papa agreed, and he divided the meal so that Rav Papa would have X amount and Rav Huna would have X amount. Anyways, Ozu Arav Bahadi. Then Rav Huna went and he decided to have a meal together with Ravina. In the time that Rav Huna bereided Rav Yeshua ate one portion, Ravina Tamanya, 8 portions, double what was going on with Rav Papa. Omar, Rav Huna said, Meya Papi v'Roichada Ravina, 100 poppies, but not one Ravina. Better to eat with Rav Papa than to go eat with Ravina. Okay, so what do we get out of these kind of stories? Besides the point, it's always good to get a good chuckle. It's another point to recognize that the greats among us were also human. And that is one major portion. It's true. As any person whose name is mentioned in the Gemara, as opposed to sometimes when it says, Pliny, this Talmud Chacham said, when the name is mentioned, it means they were Zoicha to Ruach HaKodesh. That means that they had the great honor of having the Shechina, the presence upon them. And that's why the name is mentioned in the Gemara. When the name is not mentioned, it means they were a great Talmud Chacham, but they weren't hadn't reached the level of having Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit rests on them. So we're talking about great men. In Kol Zeh, that it's great men, they were men. Today is Zayin Adar. Zayin Adar is the birthday and the yahrzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe our teacher. Moshe the Raya Mehemna, the faithful servant. Yet, as I pointed out in the past, and we pointed it out this week with a conversation on this, we do not know where Moshe Rabbeinu is buried. In the Haggadah on Pesach, we really do not mention Moshe Rabbeinu's name. We don't mention Moshe Rabbeinu's name, Moses' name. We mention it once as an aside, because at the end of the day, a servant of Hashem, a Raya Mehemna, a leader in the Jewish people, is only a leader by dint of the people, a government of the people by the people. Because we didn't need kings. For 400 years, when we came to Eretz Yisrael, the first 400 years, we didn't have kings. We weren't supposed to have kings. We have one king, the Melech Malchei Amlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem. The stories in the Shas humanize the greats from among us, not in a negative way, but in a very positive way, because that's the whole point. They were human, and yet they were able to climb to unbelievable heights that 2,000 years later we're still learning their words and we're learning together with them. Never forgotten, as alive today as they were 2,000 years ago. And that's the point. The point is, in all of us is the ability, with all our being human, to climb to great heights. Says the Gemara Vaita, Tanu Rabbana, Hamamuna acherim imoi al pischoi va'al chagigosoi. If somebody registers with him on his Pesach and his chagiga, reminder, there were two kinds of chagigos. Every yontif, every one of the regalim, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, they brought a special chagiga called the chagiga shlomim, the shalmei chagiga. Okay, and that was only to celebrate the yontif. That's not what we're talking about here. This was specifically known as Chagiga Yud Dalet, the Chagiga of the 14th, because the Korban Pesach needs to be eaten. Al Hasoiva, the Korban piece of Pesach needs to be eaten with a complete stomach. That means you need to be full before you finish eating the Korban Pesach. So they would bring a second Korban called the Chagiga Yud Dalet together with the Korban Pesach to make sure that there was enough meat to make sure they were filled up before they ate the Korban Pesach. So this case is that Ruvain has a Korban Pesach and he has a Korban Chagiga, the Chagiga Yud Dalet, and Shimon comes along and registers on his Pesach and his Chagiga. Now the case goes like this. Mo'os, the money in his hand, the money that's given to register with him, that Shimon gives to Ruvain to register on his karbanos, that money is chulin. This is very hard to understand, because this money is going for what? It's going for his Korban Pesach, his Pesach sacrifice, and his Chagiga. Those are holy offerings, right? Those are consecrated offerings. So you're putting money, right? You're putting money, essentially, Shimon is buying a portion into these kabbanas. When he's buying a portion into the kabbanas, it means the kabbanas are moving from Ruvain to Shimon, a portion, but the money that then he receives is also holy. It's been redeemed onto the money. Yet, nonetheless, what does this Baraisa say? The money that Ruvain receives from Shimon to allow Shimon to register on his kabbanas, the money in his hand is chulin, which means simply, based upon here, that he's allowed to use that money for whatever he wants. But it says like this: The one who sells his oilos or his shlomim offerings, lo yosef v'lo klum, has accomplished nothing. Okay? He will not, it cannot be offered because these kabbanis, the shlomim or the chatas or the oilo that you're bringing can only establish atonement only for the person, the original purchaser. You cannot sell it onwards. You cannot sell its holiness onto a second party, so now that the second party will benefit from these kabbanis. Okay? And the money that he did receive from the purchaser, okay, the money that he does receive from the purchaser, logically I would tell you, what would you tell me? Well, if it accomplishes nothing, the Shimon wants to buy these oilers and these shalomims from Reuven. It turns out he accomplished nothing by buying it. Logically, Reuven would have to give back the money to Shimon. Says the Brisa, no. The money that he received from the purchaser, whatever it is, falls into the communal fund for Nedavas, Oilos Nedavas, which is that we put the money aside, and when the Beis Hamikdash didn't have enough kabbanis to bring, they would take the money out, buy animals, and bring up the voluntary donated offering. So now we've got a question, because none of this makes any sense whatsoever. The first part of the Brisa said that the money that he bought, that Shimon gave to Reuben to buy a portion of his Pesach and Chagiga, the money in Reuben's hand is chulin. He can use it for whatever he wants. That makes no sense. The second half is, if it's an oilo or shlomim that he bought, he accomplished nothing, and yet Reuben doesn't have to give Shimon back his money. It goes to the communal fund. So what's going on over here? Since he accomplished nothing at all through the sale of the oil and the shlomim, why does it go to the communal fund for the voluntary offers? It should go back, obviously, to Shimon. Shimon only gave you the money in order to get these kabbanis to use it for himself. He didn't know that's meaningless. He can't use it. It doesn't accomplish his atonement. So if that's the case, what's going on? Amaravo, you're right. Kinaso. It's a kinas that he shouldn't, that Shimon should have known. This is not a business where people are supposed to be in, selling kabbanis. Umay kol shehein, and therefore what's the lashon, whatever it is, it said over there, umayis kol shehein, and the money, whatever it is, yibul in a double falls to the communal fund for voluntary offerings. What does that mean, whatever it is? Says the Gemara. Even if the oil and the shlomim were worth only $4, and Shimon gave Reuven $5, they find the purchaser that even on the extra money that he paid, he loses the money. Okay, now that only handles the second half. Now back to the first half. Remember again, Shimon buys a portion to register a portion of Reuven's Pesach and Chagiga in order to register on his Pesach and to to register on his Chagiga, and the money that he gives Reuven apparently is chulin, is unconsecrated. You could use it for whatever you want. That makes no sense. Says the Gemara, Ula, and some say Rabbi Ishia said, perhaps my chaverim in Bavel. Talmud Dahar Nilsa can explain this to me. This person, Reuven the owner, designates a lamb to be his Pesach. And then Shimon comes along and designates his money to buy a share of Reuven's Pesach. Right? He's buying a share. He wants to register on Reuven's carbon, right? So he's buying a share he's buying stocks in this Behema, so that he has some sort of ownership, so he can be registered on it. So therefore, the animal, the lamb for the carbon Pesach, and the money are consecrated, are made holy. Because one, Reuben designated this animal to be a Pesach, that's making it holy, and Shimon designates this money to use, to register, to buy a chelik in the holy carbon. So the money is holy. So now we have a problem. Hey, Chedish, Chalal Hedish, Diktani Moyish should be Chulin. How can you say that the sanctity of the money falls on the sanctity of the carbon? Right? Diktani Moyish should be Chulin. And that you should be able to say the money in your hand is Chulin. Good morning, Daddy. We're on the bottom of 89B3. We're on the bottom of 89 Amud Beis. We're about to get onto the dot. So again, the question is like this. The animal is holy, right? The Korban Pesach is holy. Now, essentially, Reuven, who owns this animal, is redeeming a portion of the holiness of this animal and giving over that holiness to Shimon. How come he's doing that? Because Shimon is giving him money to buy that portion of the holiness. We all know when it comes to redeeming, so let's say Meiser Sheni, right, that you have to bring to Yerushalayim, you have to bring to Jerusalem, right? The second Meiser that you have to bring food to Jerusalem. The rule is you don't have to carry the food. If you're in New York, well, let's say you're in Ashdod, okay, and you have to bring it to Jerusalem, you don't have to carry the whole bushel full of fruit up to You're allowed to redeem it onto the money. The money is chulin. So by redeeming the grain onto the money, the grain loses its holiness, okay? Loses its holiness, and the money becomes now holy, and you carry the money to Jerusalem to spend in Jerusalem, right. Okay? But here, nothing is losing its holiness. The grain in this case is the Korban Pesach itself. Reuven assigned this behemoth to be a Korban Pesach. So it's a Korban Pesach. Shimon wants to belong to this Korban Pesach. So he buys in. Reuven sells him a portion of the animal. But the animal doesn't change. It remains what? Holy.
So
now I've got
holy
that was put on a holy animal. So you got holy onto holy. Nothing is leaving. In that case, how did the Baraisa before say that the money that comes into his hand, it comes into Reuven's hand as the seller of the portion, of the behemoth, it's chulin, he can use it for whatever he wants. He can go ahead and buy Yankee tickets. Doesn't make any sense. Right, it should not be cut at all. It's holy to holy. We're now on the daf Tzadik Amid Aleph. So now everybody, for 1 minute, for 5 minutes, don't look at the Gemara. Let's just have an Akdama, an introduction to what's coming over here. Okay? It goes like this. On this Amid, we're going to bang into Rebbe. Okay? Rebbe HaKadosh, Rebbe the Prince, the Yehuda Anasi, who's going to say, if Shimon gives money to Reuven in order to buy a portion of Reuven's animal, right? In other words, to register himself on Reuven's Pesach, okay? In Reuven's Pesach, Reuven is allowed to use the money for all that he wants. He can use it, and he's free. The money is chul, which is an argument with the Rabbanon. The Rabbanon are going to say he's only allowed to use the money for the needs of the Pesach. For an example, to buy wood in order to roast the Pesach. Now, what is the reason? Let's think about it, everybody. What is the svara? What is the logic of Rebbe saying, I'm allowed to use this money any which way I want? It doesn't make any sense. It's holy to holy. So the answer has to be one of two reasons. The behemoth, even after it was mikudesh to be a Pesach, even though Reuven said, I'm assigning this sheep to be a Pesach, still it's considered to be Bereshus Baloi. It's still considered to be in the possession of Ruvain. It doesn't yet belong to the possession Rishus Shamayim. It doesn't yet belong to the possession of heaven. Because right now, it's here. Right now, other people could register on it. It's sitting by me, right? So right now, even though I designated it for a Pesach, since I have not yet slaughtered it, I haven't yet started with it, it's still considered to be in my possession. And we all know
limited kedusha.
Well, we haven't gotten to that yet. 1 second. So, which means possession is 9/10 of right. Possession is 9/10 of the law. So therefore, since it's still in my possession, it's mutter b'mekach u'b'memkach. It's mutter to buy and sell, to do business with this animal. Even though I designated it, the designation means I can't use it for anything else. But since I retain complete control of this animal at this present time, it's in my possession, and if it's in my possession, I'm still a freebie to buy and sell. Okay? So far that makes sense. That's reason number one. However, I can give you a second reason. That's the easy reason, by the way. The second reason is this. When you're mafreshit the kodesh, that means you designated that this animal is going to be my korban pesach. Right away, it becomes Rishus Shamayim. Since I can no longer use this animal for anything else, it's designated as a Pesach. It can only be a Pesach. It already left my possession because I can't change its use. It already belongs to Rishus Shamayim. It's in the possession of heaven. But the money that Shimon uses to buy a chelek, to buy a portion in Ruvain's Pesach, in other words, that portion that Ruvain is selling, he's not selling. That portion, that money that he gives to Ruvain is not mekudesh mitchila. It's not holy at the beginning. He bought a portion in the holy korban because Ruvain gives this portion, those portions that he's allowing people to register on, he gives it to Shimon or gives it to the others, bimatona. He gives it to them as a present. He's a nice guy. Ruvain says, "Oh, you need to register on a Pesach. You need to be mekayim your mitzvah. I'm giving you a portion of my animal as a present." And Shimon says, "Oh, I'm also a nice guy. I'm so thankful that you gave me this wonderful present. Here, let me give you $100 as a present back to you." So everybody is giving presents. Now, I'm sure everybody here is putting quotes next to the word presents. This is the Jewish mind working around the problem. This is the same problem like a heter iska. When you lend somebody money, you're not allowed to lend it to him on interest. But then Chazal saw that nobody was lending anybody money, so they created the heter iska. You're allowed to do the heter permitting iska by creating it not as a loan, but as a business deal. So essentially what we got here, they took it out. They said it's not a business deal. I'm not buying a portion. Reuven is a kind soul. He's giving out presents. He's giving out presents as portions of everybody's korbanos, of his korban. And everybody else says, "Oh, Reuben's such a nice guy. I'm going to give him $100 as a present back." The fact that this money is presents, therefore makes them chulin, and you can do what you want with them. So this is the one or two things. Either it's because since right now it's in your possession, and possession is 9/10 of the law, so therefore, since it's in my thing, I could use the money that I receive at this point, or no, it's holy right away, and it belongs to Hashem already, it's Rishus Shamayim, but the giving away of the portions has been matana, and therefore the money you receive is also b'matana. Good. That's only half the story. You still can't start the Gemara. Because now in Masechtas Temura, Daf Lamed, and this is what this whole Gemara is going to be about, it's talking about the Indian of Asnan Zoyna. An Asnan Zoyna means a present of a prostitute. If somebody pays a prostitute with an animal, the prostitute can't turn around and use the animal to bring it as an offering in the Beis Hamikdash. Or if somebody bought a dog, he decided he wants a dog, and he gave the owner of the dog an animal, the owner that just got the former owner of the dog cannot go ahead and use this animal as an offering in the Beis Hamikdash, because the pasuk says, "Lo tovi asnan zoyna," you shall not bring an asnan zoyna, the earnings of a prostitute, umeichir kelev, or the thing that you purchased the dog with, Beis Hashem Elokecha, to the house of Hashem your God, l'chol neder, for any promise that you made, ki to'avas Hashem gam shenayim, because it's an abomination to Hashem your God, both of them. So it turns out, most importantly, the payment, the prostitute's payment, where somebody paid off the prostitute with an animal, okay? Like Yehuda with Tamar, right? Yehuda gave Tamar sheep, okay? So, you can't pay it up. Now, the Mishnah, therefore, is saying over there in Temura, we're still in the introduction. The Mishnah says, however, if the behemah that you gave, listen to this, Reuven was mekadesh a behemah. He consecrated a behemah. And then his desires got the better of him, and he decides to pay the prostitute with this animal that he already made kodesh, that he consecrated for the Beis Hamikdash. He says, I'm going to give it to the Zayna. Now, the Zayna then turns around and says, this animal is already mekudesh. She's a well-learned Zayna. She knows how to learn. So it says, the prostitute goes and says, you know what? I'm going to give it back to the Beis Hamikdash. Let them use it as a carbon. The answer is, she's allowed to do that. It's not considered a problem of Asnan Zoyna, because a behemoth that was already kodesh, that was consecrated, and was subsequently used as a payment to a prostitute, the prostitute can turn around because the dick and give it back to the Beis Hamikdash and perfectly good to use. Because the din of an Asnan Zoyna, pashtus, is bein pashut kishemekadesh, it's enei shaloi. Since it's holy, it was already mekudesh consecrated, it didn't belong to the guy.
Belonged to Hashem.
From here it already belonged to Hashem. Well, Hashem is not giving over the animal to the prostitute.
Right.
The guy's giving over the animal to the prostitute. So he gave over an animal that he had no right to give to the prostitute. So the prostitute is actually doing the right thing by giving it back. She's entitled to give it back because she never really belonged to her because she never had any rights to it, right?
Yitzchak.
And it's hers. But let me just finish the thought, Daddy. Let me finish the thought. 1 second. It's not what it calls any shaloyoi. So therefore it's muta, which means it's muta, therefore it's muta litin adam acher, it's rishus shamayim. So what do you see? Now, from here it would seem therefore, it's very simple. It doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to heaven. The proof is that she's allowed to give it back. Okay? Nonetheless, he's paid off. He doesn't owe the prostitute any more money. He's paid off. So you see that you can actually go ahead and use it. But here's the thing. But you see, over there, you need a pasuk. Over there in the Mishnah, in the Baraisa, over there, you needed a specific pasuk to teach us this halacha that you're allowed to use it, right? Which meant that without a pasuk, I would have said it's also completely. that even though it was Mekudesh and therefore belongs to Shemayim, Im Kozeh, the Rishus Bailim Oindim. It stands in the Rishus Bailim. The fact that the Torah had, in other words, that over there, you needed a posik to tell me that you could bring it back, right? Because without that, I would say it's completely usher. From here, I learn that without the posik, it means that even though it belongs to heaven because it was already Mekudesh, a person is, since it's in my possession, I'm allowed to go ahead and make money from it, right? So from that Mishnah, we're going to explain Rebbe's Yesod, that the money that Reuben receives, that Reuben accepts from Shimon, when Shimon buys a portion of his Pesach, even though it's holy, even though it already belongs to Hashem, he still can use it for whatever purpose he wants. Because if over here you could actually give it to a prostitute, then Reuben can certainly use it to buy Yankee tickets. That's it. And that is the entire Gemara all the way down to the Mishnah.
Shabbat shalom.
Sorry, it took so long. This took me about a half hour, 45 minutes, just to understand where this is going. That's where we're up to.
So,
Jeff, you okay with all of this? Yes, Daddy.
Who gets the credit for the korban? The original owner that was Mekadosh or the designer?
It seems to be the designer, the prostitute. No. She's the tzadekis.
No,
she's giving it back.
She did a good thing, but he gets the credit for it.
Maybe, unless he's allowed to do business with it.
It's his. He was Mekadosh it. It's
right.
Already, she's like a shliach. She's only a shliach.
Yes, but if he's allowed to sell it, if we're saying he's allowed to sell it, he's allowed to buy chulim with it.
He didn't sell it. I'm not talking about the Korban Pesach. I'm talking about where he was Mekadosh an animal.
Oh, that's something else. He was Mekadosh. Right. Right, he gets it. Right, he gets it. So in other words, Daddy, what you're saying is he gets his cake and he gets to eat it too.
Right.
In other words, he can spend time with the prostitute and then turn around and this korban will atone for him. Perfect. It's all good. Perfect. Guys figured it out. Beautiful. Okay. So now, by the way, this is one of those Gemaras where the rule, therefore, is the Gemara was written by men, for men. Let me repeat that. By men, for men. This is one of the reasons why Gemaras are not taught to women. Because you can imagine you would have this, the women start learning this Gemara about an asnan zaina, about payments to a prostitute, and the korban is still good. They're going to go out of their minds. So this is another one of those. This is another one. In fact, this is another one of those quirky halachas that are based on kinyonim. How do transactions work? At the end of the day, obviously, this is not the optimum way. The real question becomes, what is the law? Not what your emotions are saying about this. What's the law? The law, and this law is combining two sets of laws. Isurin, holiness, and it's also set upon the mundane of buying and selling. Nizikin, okay? Mekach memka. And that's what this is all about. What in the world is going on? It's basically the halacha. So says the Gemara. Amar Abaya. Okay? And if you don't understand this too much, don't worry about it. Most people don't understand this Gemara.
Okay, you're doing perfect. Beautiful.
Thank you. I mean, it took me a long time just to figure out where this is going. Amar Abaya. If Rabbi Oishi had not established that Mishnah in Tamura about the Asnan Zoina, the payment of the prostitute, as referring to registering a Zoiner on his Pesach, because even the prostitute has a mitzvah bringing the korban Pesach. and it's Rebbe that says that the money could be used for whatever you want, I would not have established the Mishnah as Rebbe and as Zoyna. I would have established the Mishnah that we're talking about Bekochim Kalim, by the lesser sanctity, i.e. Shalomim's Toida and the Pesach, which are slaughtered in the outside courtyard and are allowed to be eaten anywhere in Yerushalayim, anywhere in Jerusalem, not just on the mountain, not just on the mountain. And I would have said the opinion is like Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, the Omar Kodshim Kalim Mamoin Ba'alamu. It's a simple fact that Kodshim Kalim, lesser sanctity, is the property of the owner. Avo b'Pesach loy mishari inish, but according to Rebbe, a person does not limit the sanctity of the Pesach. In other words, the Pesach belongs to Hashem. It's Bereshus Shamayim, belongs to heaven. B'mois vaday mishari inchi. With regarding money, the money of the registration, that limits the sanctity. This is what the words my father was using before. Mishayer inchi. A person says, I'm going to take that money and I'm not going to put onto it full sanctification. How am I going to get around that? Sanctity is sanctity. There's no 50% sanctity. It's either holy or not holy. So what does that mean? I'm only going to do partial holiness. It doesn't mean that you're allowed to buy Met tickets, but not Yankee tickets, heaven forbid. It means you can buy even Yankee tickets. How do you do this? This is what he does. When he first sets the money aside, when Shimon, who wants to buy in, sets the money aside to be buy in, his attention is to set it aside. In other words, exactly like we said before, I'm setting it aside as a present to Reuven. Reuven is going to give me a present of a portion of his carbon Pesach, and I'm going to be a nice guy and say, Reuven, you're the sweetest guy in the world. I'm going to give you a present back of $100. So he never put sanctification on it. He put it down on the side as a present to Reuven, as a thank you for giving me a portion of your animal. It's a wink and a wink. That's got nothing to do with it. What exactly? It's like the Heta Iska. It's not a loan, it's a business deal. Here, it's not a business deal, it's a gift. That's it, a sharing of gifts. We're now on 98.2. 98.2. Now, Rebbe, if this price is like Rebbe, Mumishum Haki, the money that's in Reuven's hand, having sold to Shimon, having not sold to Shimon, excuse me, having given to Shimon as a present a portion of his Pesach, and Shimon turned around and gave Reuven a present to Reuven, and Shimon gave a present of money to Reuven, so the money is chulin, which means I pay tickets with it to the Pesach. That's it. That's all I got to say, actually. Okay, because all of this is in parentheses. Okay? All right? To the Pesach, Mishayinshi, Mois Vadi Mishayinshi, Lo Mishayinshi. Right? So that's it. Says the Gemara. Vahu to come Moiki Le Rab Oishia Berevi. And that Mishnah, which the one about Asna and Zoyna, about the prostitute's money. Okay? Which Rabbi Oishi said belonged to Rebbe. Loyam meaning another Rebbe. I would not have normally attributed it to Rebbe, the Pesach loy misharinshi, because a person does not limit the sanctity of the Pesach itself. He does not do it itself, right? That's what he says, because a person does, and people do put, it's only on the money that he puts aside, but not on the animal itself. So the animal itself retains complete holiness. So now, but it's impossible to say that the price is like Rabbi Yossi. What did Rabbi Yossi say again? I would have said that it's kachin kalim, lesser sanctity, and lesser sanctity is the possession of the owner, not the possession of the one Most High. Why? Why not? Because the second part of that parisa says, because if one sells his oilus or his shlomim, he's done nothing. But according to Rabbi Yossi, the sale of a shalomim should be valid. An oila is kodesh kedoshim. So I'll grant you, it's nothing. It's not yours. It's what belongs to it belongs to heaven. But a shalomim is kachim kalim. And what does Rabbi Yossi hold about kachim kalim? Everybody, lesser sanctity. Rabbi Yossi said before, about Rabbi Yossi Galili, the Oma kachim kalim mamoy balamu. Kachim kalim, lesser sanctity belongs is the money of the owner, and if it's the money of the owner, he's allowed to use it for whatever he wants. So how come you say if he sells his shalomim, he didn't accomplish anything? What are you talking about? It's his money. He has the right to sell it. Right? Good question. But now that Rabbi Oshi has established the Mishnah in Temurah, the one about Asnan Zainab and Mamin Zainab al Pischai, the money of a Zainab to register on a Pesach, V'Rebbihi, it's Rebbe Shema Mino, the Svirale, Afilu B'Pischai, Mishare Inchi. That Rebbe holds that a person does limit the sanctity of his Pesach, he retains it as his personal property. It is his personal property. In other words, he designates it, but as long as he can continue to register people on it, it retains his own property, and therefore the money that he receives is the reason for it is not because it was holy and we did it as presents, but in fact, it's not holy yet. It's not holy, it's his property. It's his property, not possession. It's 9/10 of the law, and therefore he's got perfectly rights to sell whatever he wants. So says the Gemara, now that I just spent a half hour trying to understand this point. Yes, Charlie.
So this is where, when you first explained it, there were two options of why Rebbe would hold. And this is the first or the second, but it's not saying
it's not a present. It's not dealing with presents because it's not holy. He still owns it. Exactly. Okay. This is exactly right. In other words, we're dealing with the Gemara, right? And we're dealing with the Gemara that essentially is saying not just what's the facts, what's the reasoning behind the facts. So now, and we're going to keep on doing this, Charlie. The whole Amid is back and forth and back and forth. That's it. Mahi de Rabbi Ishia. Where did Rabbi Ishia say his thing? That's non. In other words, we just spent a quarter of an Amid over here, a half hour, trying to understand this. We're just trying to get to the Mishnah at the end of this Amid, right? Okay? And but we don't even know the facts. If it wasn't for the fact that I gave the introduction, we wouldn't have any idea what we're talking about. So in typical fashion, the Gemara says, by the way, what are we talking about? Mahi de Rabbi Ishia, what's the context of Rabbi Ishia that's not? Because we learned in this Mishnah in Temurah, Daf Lamed, on the base 30b, no sanlo mikudish ba'asnana. If one gave a zoina, an item that was holy as her payment, so he's holy, and then he paid off the zoina, they're allowed to go back and be used on the Mizbeach. Okay? Which of course is very hard to understand because we said Asna and Zoina is not allowed to go onto the altar because it's an abomination to God, right? But here we're saying, if since it was already holy and then you paid off the Zoina, it's not the Zoina's because you had no right to give it. You had no right to give it over to the Zoina, to the prostitute. If he gave her chulin birds, unconsecrated birds, Hare Elu Isurim. These would be usher. Why? Because he has the right to birds. So now it belongs to her. It belongs to her. It's Asnain Zaina. It's the payment of a prostitute. That can't go back. Simple. So the other case where it was already holy and then he gave it to her, he had no right to give it to her. So it never really belonged to her in the first place, so it never lost its holiness. Says the Gemara. Shahaya B'din. Because without this, I would have said a Kal D'Chayma for Tory argument that would have showed you just the opposite. Ma'im Kujashim. Since consecrated items. Shahamum Pasabehem. When it has a blemish, it's a disqualification, right? An animal that gets a blemish, even though it's already been made holy, if it gets a blemish, it's disqualified from being brought on the altar, on the Mizbeach. Ain't asnin machzir. Nonetheless, because it's already holy, the payment of a zayna or the dog's exchange, right, does not apply to it. That is not a problem. The fact that it touched the hands of the prostitute who was exchanged for a dog changes nothing because the animal was already holy and you had no right to give it over to somebody else. Its only problem is that it's blemished. No other problems. However, oifais, birds, shein hamum paisabehem, where a blemish does not disqualify. Only animals, sheep, goats, an ox, over there blemishes count. Birds don't have blemishes. Okay? Birds don't have, we're talking about the blemish of the eye, obviously.
No.
Is that what you were going to say?
No. The only blemish that applies to a bird is mechusar aver. If an aver has been missing.
But it means if one limb is missing, then it's not a complete bird.
Right.
Right. So that in fact, right. So now that in fact is a problem, not even of a mum, it's that it's not a complete bird. When the Torah says you have to bring a bird, it says you have to bring a bird, it has to be a complete bird. See, that's not, when I say a mum, a blemish, I mean you have the animal and it has a cataract in the eye.
Right, that's not for a bird, it doesn't apply.
On a bird, it's not a blemish. When it's missing a limb, that is a problem that you didn't bring a bird. You brought 3/4 of a bird. Right. It's not a bird. A bird is a complete bird. That's a difference. That in reality, that's not a mum. The truth
what
is
about
Yeah.
with the extra gid? You know, there was a big problem the last 2 years with an extra gid by the feet itself. Okay?
That is a good question. What's the answer?
Right.
I don't really know.
I have the answer.
Yeah.
Say it again, Jerry. Jerry, say it again.
There's a cloud
Yeah.
called Yeser Kenotul Domi.
Daddy, back up.
What? Oh, it is a cloud that says Yeser Kenotul
Yeah, which
Domi.
means
Anything that's extra is as if it was already cut off. Therefore, it's a mum, even by a bird.
Correct. And that's why it was traced. They were all traced.
Right. Because anything that's extra, let's say a kohen has 6 fingers. That's called the balmum. Because yeser cannot put them. You understand what I mean?
Got it. So, yeah. So in other words, this is what Jerry just said, that in fact the psak that he got was that it's no good. Right. Very good. Jerry, I didn't know that. Thank you, Daddy. I didn't know that at all. Thank you.
That's a klal in all korbanos.
In all korbanos. Okay, so now let's get back over here. So here we got the case of the oifis, the birds. She'ena mum poiselbeh, where a blemish does not disqualify. If it gets a cataract in its eye, if it gets a wart on its body, you can still bring the bird up. It's not a problem. In Kolzeh, you would say, Eino din she'ein asenu machir chalaleim. You would say, surely If madach a behema, where a blemish disqualifies. Nonetheless, if it was already made holy, what do you call it? It would nonetheless, an asna and zayna is no good. A bird where there are no disqualifications, if there are no blemishes that disqualify, I would say that therefore for sure the payment of a prostitute is not a problem. You can bring it. Therefore it says all vow offerings. L'Rabbi says to include birds in the laws of Asna and Zayna and a dog's exchange. That no, they cannot be brought. So says the Gemara. But can you really make this kal b'chayma? It's got a flaw. Animals, we said the animals are already holy. The animals are holy already. So therefore you can't even give it over to the Zayna. You can't give it over to the prostitute because the animals are already holy. They don't belong to you. Who do they belong to? They belong to Shemayim, to heaven. Ma oifis. Shein amun poisel behem. Asanu machzir chalaleyen. A blemish which does not disqualify them. Right? The rule of Asna and Zayna applies. Mukdoshim, things that are already holy. Shamun poisel behem. That a disqualification does disqualify them. I would therefore say they certainly have a disqualification of the prostitute's payment. You're right, it's already holy. But I would say a bird which disqualifications do not apply. And a chulin start off life as unconsecrated. The payment to a prostitute disqualifies it. Certainly an animal that became holy, that it's so holy that any kind of blemish disqualifies it. Therefore, any payment to a prostitute, even though she wasn't entitled to the payment, simply, right? She wasn't entitled to the payment. What do you call it? With Pasel, says the Gemara, Talmud Loimel L'chol Neder Praklin and Nidar, to the exclusion of something that was already vowed. What do you mean already vowed? Something that was already made holy. Once it's holy, it's off the thing, right? Once it's holy, it's off the thing. It's off the grid, and therefore there's no Asna and Zayna. We're now on 98.3. 98.3. So says the Gemara, Elatamo, the only reason why holy Mekudashim, holy items are not subject to the Zionist payment, the prostitute payment, because of Rahman and Neder. Something that was already vowed, something that was not yet vowed, something that was already vowed, is off the grid. If you didn't have that pasuk, I would have said that they would have, without the pasuk to tell me, no, I would have said, even though it's already holy, in kol zeh what? In kol zeh, if the prostitute gets involved, it's no good. It's a disqualification. But a person cannot forbid an item that's not his. In other words, Reuven can't say, I am Mikadesh's Shimon's car. He can't do that. He doesn't own Shimon's car. In this case, who cares if he gave it to the Zayna? It didn't belong to her. It belonged to the Holy One. It belonged to heaven. It's not his. Elamai, from here you see, without it, you would not be able to answer it. And therefore, what are we looking at over here? Whose money is it?
It's
Elamai. The fact that I need a pasuk, I'm forced to have a pasuk, because without the pasuk, I would think it asers, but it's a double, it's a also double shame. A person does not forbid something that's not his. So how can you forbid it by giving it over to the prostitute? It's meaningless. It wasn't yours. The teretz, therefore, would have to be that it is yours. That even though you made it holy, since you still have some sort of responsibility on this animal, you retain ownership. Here's your proof that even though you're pulling, because otherwise the Torah wouldn't go out of its way to have to bring a pasuk.
So see,
Says
it goes
the
according to
Gemara.
Rebbe.
So there are, Daddy, you're giving it away. If you're right, it's needed like one registers as Zaina on his Pesach offering the Rebbe, and it's Rebbe. And Rebbe could be, now which Rebbe is it? Is it Rebbe because he said since possession is 9/10 of the law, you retain ownership? Or is it because of these presents? But Pashtus, it's because of the first reason, not because of the second reason. So now, having said all this, Charlie, having said all this, the Gemara says, my Rebbe, by the way, we've been struggling with this all along. Who's this Rebbe? Who exactly is Rebbe? If you realize, up till now, we don't actually know where Rebbe came about. We never brought his place. So in typical fashion, the Gemara goes around and goes, oops. By the way, guys, you might not have noticed, but we've been discussing this, but I never gave you the actual original location. My Rebbe. Who's Rebbe? The Tanya, we learned. The pasuk says like this: the and you can see it on the side of the. If you look on the side, on the right-hand side of the Gemara, in the Art Scrolls, it brings down the psukim. It brings down the psukim of bays. The second pasuk, it says, "V'im yemayet habayis miyos miseh." If the household is too small for the lamb that you're bringing for the carbon pesach. Okay, so in other words, you're afraid you're going to end up leaving over meat because you're not going to have enough people to eat it up. V'lokachu, right? V'lokachu u'shechenai hakorev el beisai. He should take him and his neighbors that are near his house. V'nichnatz nefashos ish lefi acholu. Every man to what he could eat, meaning there has to be enough. Don't register too many people. Everybody's got to have at least an olive's volume, a shir achilo of a kazayis. Tochaisu alaseh, they could be registered on the set. So this is the pasuk about registration. That in fact you're allowed to do business over here. This is the pasuk that if one cannot afford the items, and this pasuk is coming to say something else, that if you cannot afford the items that you need for the carbon pesach. So you need wood in order to roast your carbon pesach. You need a stick, you need a spit, and a rotisserie machine to turn it, right? To turn it on the stick, on the spit, to have rotisserie carbon pesach. Is that what the carbon pesach was? Roasted over an open fire. Not chestnuts roasted over an open fire, a carbon pesach roasted over an open fire. So, see, there's nothing new in the world. We all know where everybody got things from. So here we go. The answer, the pasuk says, you can sustain the lamb from the proceeds of the lamb. Since the lamb, the carbon pesach requires fuel and all the other instruments that go together in order to make the lamb, you're allowed to sell portions in your lamb to go ahead and raise money, but the money is only available for what? The money is only available to be used in conjunction with the Carbon Pesach. That's the Rabbanon. Michtei achilo. But you need it for items required for eating the lamb. The loy michtei mekach. But not because you're going into business and you say, oh, you know what? I got an opportunity here. Everybody needs to bring a carbon Pesach. I have a carbon Pesach. All the guys in my shia do not. I'll sell their portions and I'll have a carbon Pesach and I'll make money. Right? Says the Rabbanan, absolutely not. Rebbe Omar comes along. Rebbe, now we're getting to our Rebbe that we've been struggling with. Ma'af michtei mekach. Nah, you can even sell to buy Yankee tickets. She'im eloi. Because if a person does not have enough money for his personal needs, and clearly going to a Yankee game is a personal need, He can register others with him on his Pesach and on his Chagiga. Again, the Chagiga is Chagiga Yud Dalid, not the famous Chagiga of Shalmei Chagiga, that which was always brought as a celebration of the Yom Tif. This was the Chagiga that was put on Yud Dalid to make sure that you ate the Korban Pesach ala soiva when you were full, so you made sure you had enough meat together with it. So, and it says the Gemara, money should be yadai, and the money, therefore, that comes into his hand is chulin, can be used for any purpose whatsoever, i.e., the Yankee ticket. Why? Shalmanas came higdishu as his because on this condition did they consecrate their Pesach offerings in the first place. In other words, there are no, he retains it as his property so that he can sell it for every purpose. Again, it seems over here, reason number one of Rebbe, that possession is 9/10 of the law. So even though I designated it, I didn't, since it's under my control, I left it open to go ahead and sell it in any which way I want. It's Momoin Bailim. It doesn't seem to say over here that this is the second case of giving presents back and forth. Okay? Says it like this. Rabba and Rab Zera. Rabba and Rab Zera argue. So in other words, this machlokes that we had before of Rebbe is actually another machlokes of Rabba and Rab Zera. Okay? Okay, here we go. In the case of one who needs to buy wood in order to roast his Korban Pesach, neither the Tanakama who says you have to spend money on its needs, or Rebbe who said you're allowed to use it for anything. Nobody disputes that, of course, you're allowed to sell portions. You're allowed to sell portions for the needs of the Pesach. The chiva the content of Pesach, since it's needed for the preparation of the Pesach, can go for the Pesach. It's like the Pesach itself. Keep pligi where they arguing the matzah umara with regard to matzah umara. If you remember, the Korban Pesach is eaten sli eish, roasted over a fire. Matzah is umerayrim yechlu. Matzah and mara you will eat with it. So you have to eat matzah and maror together with the Pesach. The matzah and maror. Rabbanon Sabri, the Rabbanon say it's usher to sell swords. You're not allowed. It's forbidden to sell portions of the Pesach for the sake of eating it, of buying matzah and maror. It's a completely different act of eating. We'll talk about this in a second. The Rabbi Salman, Rabbi holds, since it renders the Pesach fit for eating, the Pesach it is viewed as the Pesach itself. It seems over here that we are dealing with one of the great fundamental questions. Is the Korban Pesach just the meat, which also has a mitzvah of having the matzah and the maror eaten with it? But if you don't have the matzah and maror, they are not ma'akev. If you only had the Pesach, the meat, and for whatever reason you don't have maror and matzah, eat the meat. That's what the Rabbanan seem to be saying. It's three mitzvahs that are brought together, but each one is a mitzvah miyuchedes, and if you only have one, eat one. Rebbe seems to be saying it's all one mitzvah. The Korban Pesach has to be eaten al matzah and maror on matzah and maror have to be eaten together with it. That without them, it's not fit to be eaten. That is a fundamental argument. Rav Moshe in the Dibros Moshe, Rav Moshe Feinstein spends close to 50 pages going back and forth. Is each individual plan? Let me tell you how it applies today, everybody. Does this mean that each one is a mitzvah by itself as part and parcel of the idea of the Korban Pesach. And since today we don't have the Korban Pesach, but we have matzah and we have maror, we have to eat the matzah and maror l'shem yichud, to have in mind with the intent that we're being mekayim a portion of the eating of the Korban Pesach. Our eating the maror and our eating the matzah, besides the mitzvah of matzah, of the erev toichlu matzahs, in the evening you shall eat matzah, which is a din in the matzah itself. There's a separate rule of the matzah that you need to eat with the Korban Pesach. I don't have the Korban Pesach. Well, according to the Rabbanon, that's okay. You don't have the Korban Pesach, you don't have the Korban Pesach. But you do have the matzah part of the Korban Pesach. Eat a kezayis worth of matzah. Eat a kezayis worth of maror as part and parcel of the Korban Pesach. And in fact, if you're paying attention at the Seder, you see that we're kind of doing that. Remember, I said that the guy who's leading the Seder has to lift up all three matzahs when he says Hamaytzi lechem min haaretz. Then he drops the bottom matzah and says Al achilas matzah. Everybody else around the table has to eat a kezayis, an olive's volume of a matzah, which is a half of a hand matzah. The person running the show has to eat an entire matzah. 2 kezesim, 2 olives. Why? 1 olive in the mitzvah of be'erev toichlu matzahs. In the evening you shall eat matzahs. And the other kezayis is for the matzah for the Korban Pesach. That's why the guy leading the show has got to eat 2 full, 1 whole hand matzah, i.e. 2 olive branches. Because it's part of the thing. And what do you think we're doing with Hillel's sandwich? What are we doing with it? Zeicha l'mikdash ki Hillel. A remembrance to Hillel, what happened in the base of Mikdash according to Hillel. So Hillel has the famous Hillel sandwich. What are we doing? We're putting matzah and maror together. I don't have the Korban Pesach, so why am I doing it? Maybe you don't have the Korban Pesach, but you have the other 2 parts of the mitzvah. And they're mitzvahs by themselves. So that's why you eat it. Rebbe would say it's only a remembrance because you don't have the Korban Pesach. If you're missing one portion, you don't have the mitzvah at all. It's all buried. It's a much larger conversation. It's extraordinarily difficult, all buried right in the words we just said. Let's just go a little further. My watch stops. I have actually no idea what time it is. Oh my God, we went way over time. I thought it was 1:45. I apologize. Let's get to the Mishnah. V'chad Omar, one said, b'matzah maror nami, in the case of one who needs matzah and maror, kula maloi pliki, nobody disputes that you are allowed to sell portions of the Pesach offering, because it says, the pasuk I've been saying the whole time over here, matzahs and royim yechlu, the Pesach shall be eaten with matzahs and royim, you shall eat the Pesach. The chibadach Pesach ninu, since these foods render the Pesach fit for eating, Pesach they're like the Pesach itself. Where they arguing, lekech by choluk, lekech by talis, where he wants to buy a shirt, or he wants to buy a cloak, or he wants to buy Yankee tickets. Rabbanah Savi, miyos misel merachmana, the pasuk says, from being a lamb, hachayu l'seh, only something that sustains the lamb. It has to do with the eating of the lamb for the Kodesh of Pesach. You cannot go buy a shirt with it. Rabbi says, sustain yourself from the seh, which means you're allowed to use it for your personal needs. 98.4. Ulabaya the Omar. If Rabbi Oishie had not established the Mishnah in Temura, that is the money of the prostitute on the Pesach, the Rebbe, and it was Rebbe, Habi Mukina law, I would have established that Mishnah, Bekachim Kalim, by the lesser sanctity, and we would have followed the view of Rabbi Galili, the Bekachim Kalim, that lesser sanctity, that said Kabbanis, like the Toida, the Shlomim, and the Pesach, that is slaughtered in the courtyard and can be eaten throughout Jerusalem, they're the property of the owners. The Pesach, but according to Rebbe, a person does not limit the sanctity. He would not retain ownership. It will belong completely to heaven. So says the Gemara about the Tani Bahi, but Rebbe himself said in the Brisa above, Shal Manas came Ekdishu Yisrael es Peschayim, because of these terms that the Jews consecrated their Pesachs. In other words, they do limit the sanctity, and it remains 9 possessions, 9/10 of the Lord remains in his property. Amor, we could say, Shal Manas came Ekdishu Yisrael Mois Peschayim. This is how the Jews consecrated the money. That in fact, it's the second situation. The truth of the matter is, when you make the Pesach holy, it belongs to Shemayim, it belongs to heaven. But what? He goes ahead and gives away as presents the portions that he registered. So he gives away portions so that others could register as presents. And other people give back to Reuben money as presents to Reuben as a big thank you. And that's really the reason behind Rebbe. The reason behind Rebbe is not that it's Mamain Bailim, it's the money of the Bailim. It's Mamain Hegdish, it's Mamain Shemayim. It's the property of heaven. But the way it's done is through presents. The same way it's not a loan, it's a business deal, and I'm allowed to work with interest. So to over here, it's not a business deal. In fact, it's just gifts one to the other. Okay, amazingly, we made it to the Mishnah. I apologize. I would have gone faster, but I didn't realize the time was flying. So for Shabbos, we're obviously going to do Tzaddik on the base. And let me just see where we'll get to. I don't want to fall too far behind. Let me just give me a second. We'll get to, okay, 91B1. 91B1, right away on the top line, it says Gufa. Okay? The text itself, Gufa. We're going to start on Sunday, a half a amud behind. We're going to start on Gufa.